Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Rumberg. I'm a managing partner with MetricNet, and I will be your host for today's webcast on desktop and service desk collaboration. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for participating in this webcast today. Those who have been on our webcasts in the past, you will notice something very different about today's webcast. Specifically, you will notice that this webcast is co-branded to indicate that it is being sponsored and co-presented by Bomgar. This is the first time we have done this at MetricNet, and I'm very proud to have Bomgar as our sponsor today. In a moment, I'll give Bomgar an opportunity to introduce themselves, but before I do that, let me get a couple of administrative announcements out of the way. During today's webcast, all of you will be in listen-only mode. However, if you have any questions during the webcast, you can type them in the dialog box that appears in the lower right corner of your screen, and I will address those questions at the end of our webcast. This particular webcast usually lasts a little more than an hour, so for those of you who have commitments later in the day, we should be wrapped up by a little after 3 o'clock Eastern Time this afternoon. Finally, just a quick word about MetricNet before we get started. I see that quite a few of our existing clients have joined us on the webcast today. But for those who have not worked with us before, let me give you just a brief introduction to MetricNet. MetricNet's core business is benchmarking. We perform benchmarks for a variety of industries and functional areas, and we complete more than 300 benchmarks a year. My role in the company is to manage the service desk, call center, and desktop support benchmarking practices at MetricNet. The work we do for service desks and desktop support organizations worldwide really spans the gambit, from benchmarking and best practice assessments to consolidation studies and outsourcing analyses. Typically, the service desks and desktop support organizations that we work with are looking to optimize their performance, and we help them achieve those objectives through benchmarking. One final note, and this is particularly important for those who wish to receive a copy of the presentation. When you exit the webcast, a brief survey will pop up on your screen. Please be aware that only those who complete the survey will receive a copy of the presentation. This survey gives us valuable feedback on the webcast. It's only 2 questions long, and it takes less than 10 seconds to complete. So if you do us a favor and answer that survey at the end of the webcast, I'd be very grateful, and in return for that courtesy, I will send you a copy of the presentation. At this time, I'd like to say a few words about our sponsor. As many of you undoubtedly know, Bomgar provides remote support solutions for easily and securely supporting computing systems and mobile devices. In the industry, this is commonly referred to as remote diagnostic capability. The company's appliance-based products help more than 6,000 organizations worldwide improve tech support efficiency and performance by enabling them to securely support nearly any device or system anywhere in the world, including Windows, Mac, Linux, iOS, Android, BlackBerry, and more. As you will learn towards the end of the webcast, Bomgar is the most flexible, secure solution for IT organizations to collaborate internally and externally during the incident management process. I'm going to turn it over to Mike Sell, Director of Strategic Alliances at Bomgar, for a brief introduction, and then we'll go ahead and get started with our webcast. Okay, Mike, it's all yours. Mike, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you might want to turn your volume up just a little bit.
Okay. Sorry about that. Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening to EMEA, and good morning to the attendees joining us in the Asia-Pacific region. And thank you, Jeff, for the kind introduction, and welcome everyone to this informative session. Bomgar is proud to partner with MetricNet on this very informative webinar. As you will soon learn, MetricNet has compiled a great deal of empirical evidence on the value of collaboration between the service desk function and desktop support teams, both from a business value perspective and most importantly from a customer experience perspective. Bomgar is a second-generation technology that has grown very quickly to become the leading solution for secure, agentless remote support used by small and large IT organizations. It has become widely known and of great concern that many remote control technologies are very insecure and are the leading source of data breach. Beyond point-to-point remote control, Bomgar allows the service desk technician using nearly any device or system to access other systems, even those off networks, to resolve the incident. And we'll show you a little bit later in this webinar how, in a very collaborative manner, Bomgar dramatically increases first contact resolution and reduces repair times by easily allowing the service desk to also work directly with Tier 2 and Tier 3 to resolve issues on the end user's device. One of the reasons for our success is our focus on security and auditing while providing a solution that is fast, easy to use, and simply works. For those of you not familiar with the Net Promoter Score, by asking one simple question, such as, how likely is it you would recommend, say, Bomgar to a friend or colleague, you get a clear measure of your company's performance through your customer's eyes. For those of you who are familiar with Net Promoter Score, you may already know that the average score for U.S. companies with a technology-based solution is 14. Many very well-known providers of technology have a negative Net Promoter Score and have a goal to get to 0. As shown on this slide, Bomgar has a score equivalent to companies you all know and whose offerings you trust to simply work. After Jeff reviews some of the data that MetricNet has collected from over 3,000 IT support benchmark studies, proves the value of collaboration, and discusses key performance indicators that we know are important to you, we'll put it all together to show which KPIs Bomgar directly impacts and how we do it using collaboration. Back to you, Jeff.
Mike, thanks for that kind introduction. Okay. As we get started here, let me just point out that if you have any difficulties at all during the webcast, I would ask you to email us at info@metricnet.com or call us in the United States at 202-321-5760. Again, if you have any difficulties at all during the webcast with the audio or the video, we can generally get you fixed up. Now today what I'm going to do is present 4 case studies from organizations that have cracked the code on collaboration between the service desk and desktop support. These case studies will reinforce the value and the benefit of collaboration within IT support. And everything that's presented today is empirical in nature. It comes out of our global benchmarking database of more than 3,000 IT support benchmarks. In those 3,000 benchmarks, we collect some 70 different key performance indicators, everything from first contact resolution rate at level 1 in the service desk to mean time to resolve in desktop support. So we've captured these 70 key performance indicators for IT support, and along the way, over the 20 years that we've been doing this, we have defined and cataloged and captured more than 120 industry best practices. These best practices address support strategy, process and procedure, human resource management, technology, key performance indicators, and what we call stakeholder communication. So it's important to understand that what you're seeing here today is empirical in nature. It's based upon what we have observed in the industry. There's nothing academic or theoretical. And in that spirit, one of the things I'd like to start with is the evolution of the service desk and desktop support over the last 25 years. And there's no better way to look at how these support functions have evolved than to look at some of the key performance indicators dating all the way back to 1988 and then looking at last year's performance. There's a pretty interesting story being told here. Let's start with the number of contacts per end user per month, and this is for the service desk. I'll get to some KPIs for desktop support momentarily. Back in 1988, it was fewer than 1 contact per end user per month. Last year, that number had grown to almost 2 contacts per end user per month. Why? Because the average knowledge worker in most corporations today has a lot more complexity on the desktop than they have before. They have multiple devices typically. Could be a laptop computer, a desktop computer, a smartphone, a printer. The average knowledge worker has more than 3 devices today. And the horsepower they have, the computing horsepower they have, is far more complex than it's ever been. The result is that they have greater support needs than they have historically. The cost per contact, fully loaded, back in 1988 was under $10. Last year that number was almost $22. Primary reason is that the complexity has gone up, and that is reflected in these handle times, which were 6.5 minutes back in 1988. Last year, the average handle time for an incident at level 1 was just under 13 minutes. Now here's where the data gets real interesting. In 1988, the percentage of tickets resolved on first contact was only 35%. Last year, that number had grown to nearly 70%. Now, this is interesting because what this says is that back in 1988, the majority of service desks were really just message-taking services. They were log and dispatch. They were taking the incident and then pushing it out to some other level of support. But as support organizations began to recognize and realize that FCR, first contact resolution rate, drives customer satisfaction at level 1, they began to make investments in training and tools and technology to increase that level 1 resolution rate. And last year, the number had gotten to 67%. That's a very positive trend because it shows that level 1 support organizations understand the correlation and the cause-effect relationship between FCR and customer satisfaction. What about the percentage of tickets resolved at level 1? This is different than FCR. You can resolve a ticket at level 1 without necessarily resolving it on first contact. We all know how that happens from time to time. Back in 1988, nearly 40% of tickets were resolved at level 1. By last year, the number had grown to 85%. That is also a very positive trend because this helps reduce total cost of ownership for support. I'll show you some data on that in a few minutes here. In 1988, average starting salaries adjusted for inflation, this represents 2012 dollars. Average starting salaries in 1988 for a level 1 support technician were about $27,000. Last year, they were $35,000. Now, this isn't because IT has become more benevolent or that the help desk and the service desk have become better at negotiating salaries. This is a reflection of the fact that support organizations now realize that if you pay a little bit more for an entry-level person, you get a more qualified, more experienced, you simply get a better rep. And you get better results from that. You get higher first contact resolution rates, higher first level resolution rates. So there's what's called a wage rate paradox, which says that as wage rates increase, at least up to a certain level, your cost per contact doesn't go up. It actually goes down because these more experienced, better educated, more qualified reps help you resolve more on first level and at first contact. Finally, in 1988, the average cost of supporting an end user was about $100 a year for the service desk. Last year, that number had grown to about $500. And again, this is due to the increased complexity on the desktop, the increased volume of contacts on the desktop. Let's turn our attention now to desktop support. Let's look at some of those key performance indicators. In 1988, there was about 1/2 of 1 ticket logged per end user per month or per seat per month. Last year, the number had increased to about 0.78. The cost per ticket has gone from $30 to about $62, and the average incident work time has gone from a little more than 17.5 minutes to a little more than 32 minutes. Now here again, the data starts to get interesting. If we look at incidents resolved on first contact, in 1988 it was only 74%. Last year it was 68%. Why might that be? Well, we can get some clues to it when we look at this. Resolved at level 1 in 88 by the service desk was only 39%. Last year it was 85%. So what that says is that there are fewer tickets being escalated from level 1 support to the desktop that could and should have been resolved at level 1. And as a result, we find that fewer incidents are being resolved on first contact by desktop support because the mix of incidents that they get, the mix of tickets that they have, are more complex than they have been in the past. There's a related metric called percent resolved level 1 capable. That sounds complicated, but really here's what it means. This represents the number of tickets resolved at desktop support that could and should have been resolved at level 1. In 1988, 54% of tickets could and should have been resolved at level 1. Last year, the number was down to 22%. Still too high, but much, much better than it was back in 1988. Technician salaries have also increased for the reasons I mentioned at level 1 support. You get a more qualified, better educated representative or technician, and you get better results from that. The cost of supporting a seat back in 1988 was about $184. That number last year had grown to nearly $600. This is a dynamic industry. And what we've learned in recent years is that support is becoming a much more strategic function within information technology. It has the potential to drive value by reducing total cost of ownership and support, by driving a positive view of IT, and helping an organization return productivity to end users. And our case studies are going to highlight these 3 key sources of leverage. So why do we want to collaborate when it's obvious there are barriers to collaboration? These barriers include things like different managers for level 1 in desktop support, different funding sources. We have a phenomenon called drive-bys and flybys and snags. What is that? Well, that's when a technician is walking around, someone grabs them and says, hey, can you help me fix this problem? Can you help me archive these old Outlook items, or can you help me turn rows into columns in Excel? Those drive-bys and flybys and snags cost money, and they violate the principles of SPOC, as you'll see in a few minutes, single point of contact. Typically, there aren't a lot of shared goals and incentives between level 1 and desktop support. There may be issues related to training. In some cases, there's lack of discipline around enforcing a single point of contact model. And for some organizations, sadly, support is a low priority. For anybody listening to this webcast that's experiencing any of these barriers, what I hope to do over the next 40 minutes or so is show you how to overcome these barriers. Not only that, but to convince you that these barriers are worth overcoming, because the benefits of collaboration include lower support costs, greater customer satisfaction with all of support, shorter cycle times on resolution, which gives productivity back to end users, and greater customer satisfaction, not just for support, but for all of information technology. So let's look at our first case study. Here's the situation. Users were calling desktop support directly. Instead of calling the level 1 service desk, they'd simply call desktop support. Call that bypass. They're bypassing the level 1 service desk. In many cases, the desktop techs would provide on-the-spot assistance whenever they were asked. The service desk didn't have any clear dispatch rules for desktop support. There was no operating level agreement between the service desk and desktop support. Tickets got lost. There was very little accountability, and customers were pretty dissatisfied with the whole thing. Now, it's helpful to understand total cost of ownership as it relates to support when we get into this case study. Last year, the cost per ticket at level 1 was $22. I showed you this data a few slides back. Here it is. Average cost per ticket of support, $22 last year. Now, for a ticket resolved by desktop support, it was $62. Now, these are additive. This is $62 on top of the $22. For level 3 support, and I realize your vernacular may be different, your terminology may be different, but at level 3 IT, say an application group, a NOC, networking group, the cost of resolving a ticket was $85, and that's on top of the $22 level 1 cost or the $62 level 2 cost if the ticket went through those levels first. Then you have field support, an incremental $200 per ticket, vendor support on average nearly $500 per ticket. Now, it's powerful to understand this because the catchphrase in the industry, get it done at level 1, it's not just a cliche. It has real value. Anything that can be resolved at level 1 should be resolved at level 1. So get it done at level 1 isn't just a catchphrase. It has real economic value. The more tickets you resolve at level 1, the lower your total cost of ownership will be. Now, in order to make all this work, you need a SPOC. You need a single point of contact. What does that look like? Well, you've got a user community out here. You've got a service desk that accepts incoming service requests and incidents through a variety of channels. It might be chat. It might be live voice. It might be an email. And they are responsible for resolving what they can at level 1 and then dispatching the other tickets to the appropriate source of support, whether it be desktop support, field support, level 2 support, or vendor support. Now, key principles around single point of contact means that the enterprise has to take an end-to-end view of user support, and you have to give the customer a single point of contact for all IT-related issues. Now, that single point of contact is the level 1 service desk. The service desk and desktop support have the same SLA with their customers, service level agreement. The service desk and desktop support have an OLA, an operating level agreement, which is kind of like an internal service level agreement. And level 1 is not responsible for resolving every incident and service request, but they are responsible for ticket triage, resolution at level 1 if possible, effective handoffs to what we call N-level support. This includes desktop support, level 2, IT, field support, vendor support, and the like. They're responsible for resolution coordination and facilitation and for ticket closure. Now, we've seen situations where tickets are closed by other support levels. That can work if the SPOC rules are followed effectively. But in general, we like to see tickets closed by level 1 support. That way you have a single point of accountability as well as a single point of entry into the support process. Key to making this process work is that these desktop drive-bys or flybys or snags where a desktop support technician is grabbed and told, hey, can you fix this problem? This has to be discouraged because it violates the single point of contact model. Now, the data shows that SPOC support reduces the total cost of ownership. When we look at the percentage of tickets resolved by desktop support that could and should have been resolved at level 1, the blue diamonds on this chart represent the percentage of tickets resolved with a single point of contact process, and on average, the tickets resolved that could have been resolved at level 1 resolved by desktop support were 15.3%. Without a SPOC process, these fuchsia-colored or hot pink squares, I suppose, the average percent of tickets resolved by desktop support that could and should have been resolved at level 1 is 22.8%. These represent defects. 23% of the tickets being resolved by desktop support could and should have been resolved at level 1. It's imperative to reduce these defects in order to get the lowest possible total cost of ownership when it comes to IT support. So don't take my word for it. This data proves that the more you resolve at level 1, the higher your level 1 resolution rates are, the lower the percent of tickets resolved by desktop support that could have been resolved at level 1, the lower your total cost of ownership for support will be. So what happened? Put a SPOC process in place. 10 months later, their level 1 ticket origination had gone from 64% to 87%. The percent of tickets resolved by desktop support that could have been resolved at level 1 went from 39 to 14%. Customer satisfaction increased from 66 to 78%, and the weighted average cost per ticket went from $73 down to $45. Why? Because it is so much less expensive to resolve at level 1 than it is to resolve at desktop support. There's real value in collaboration, and that real value is reflected in the higher customer satisfaction scores and the lower cost per ticket. That brings us to our first polling question of the day, and as you can imagine, that polling question is about first-level resolution rates and SPOC. The polling question is this: do you run a SPOC, single point of contact support organization? Are you running a SPOC, single point of contact support organization? All right, already 50% of you have weighed in on this. We like to get 80 or 90% participation in our polling surveys. And while you're completing that survey, I'd just like to say thanks to everybody dialing in. We know we've got people from all over the world. And I'll kind of go alphabetically here and just shout out to a few people. Albert Berry, thanks for joining us. Ben Reynolds, thanks for joining us. Danny Gunka, Danny LaRoche, thanks for joining us, everybody. Jason Carr, thanks for joining us. More than 1,200 of you registered for today's webcast, so I want to thank you for that. All right, if you want to vote on this poll, please do so. Do you run a SPOC, single point of contact support organization? Let me share the results of that poll with you. 71% of you are running a SPOC organization, another 24% of you are not. That's a pretty good score, and that's about what we see typically when we do this webcast. However, as recently as 2 years ago, this number was flipped. 71% said, no, we don't run a SPOC. Another 25% said, yes, we do run a SPOC. So clearly the trend is moving in the right direction. Okay, let's move on to our next case study. And this case study involves training, specifically cross-training, at a regional bank. The situation was this: the support costs were high, desktop support was sometimes short-staffed, and sometimes the service desk was short-staffed. Escalation defects, as measured by the percent resolved, level 1 capable at desktop support, they always increased when the service desk was busy. That's pretty common. The service desk gets busy, they get a long queue, calls start to abandon, they start to push tickets out to level 2 support or desktop support. Service levels were rarely met, and the customer satisfaction was low. Now, we do know that universal agents in the right circumstances can greatly improve efficiency. This support organization had 12 full-time personnel in the service desk and 7 full-time personnel in desktop support. And their hypothesis was, gee, if we could cross-train some of these agents, we might be able to handle these queues more effectively, because a service desk agent, when there's a backup on desktop support, can jump over there and do some work. And a desktop support agent, when there's a backup in the service desk, can jump over there. Good in theory, and in some cases, it actually works pretty well. Here are the success factors for cross-training your agents. The first thing is that the support personnel have got to be co-located with the users. That goes without saying, because if you're going to be doing desktop support, you can't do desktop support remotely, because desktop support by definition is done at the site of the user. So when support is co-located with the users, it's possible to do this. And when the users are in a high-density environment, like a high-rise building or a campus setting, it makes more sense. This facilitates what's called jump and go. For example, an agent is talking to an end user. They try and do some troubleshooting. It's not working. They can jump and go to the side of the user and finish the troubleshooting at the side of the user. You can do that in a high-density user environment. You can't do that when the end user is across town or, in some circumstances, across the country. It makes the most sense when the scale is relatively low, and we define that as being fewer than 20 total support techs between the service desk and desktop support. But keep in mind that not all technicians can or should be cross-trained. We have found that some desktop support technicians do not do well with remote support, and some level 1 support technicians don't do well with desktop support. If you look at the Venn diagram of service desk professionals that are really good and desktop support professionals that are very good, the overlap is only about 20%, meaning that only about 20% of really good desktop support technicians can do remote support well, and only about 20% of really good level 1 service desk technicians are good at desktop support. So not all technicians can or should be cross-trained. Here's what this organization did. They cross-trained 4 of their agents over a 6-month period of time. Customer satisfaction increased from 72 to 85%. The weighted average cost per ticket between level 1 and desktop support dropped from $67 to $55, largely because the headcount dropped from 19 to 17. With these cross-trained agents, they were simply more efficient at handling the queues. They were able to attrit, drop by 2 FTEs. The number of tickets resolved by desktop support that could have been resolved at level 1 dropped from 25% to 9%. This is a big success story. Higher customer satisfaction, lower cost per ticket, fewer defects, fewer ticket defects being escalated from level 1 support to desktop support. Okay, let's move on to our third case study. This has to do with shared incentives in a multinational insurance company. Here's the scenario. Both support groups, service desk and desktop support, looked like they were performing pretty well based on benchmarks. Their costs were actually below industry averages. Customer satisfaction was above industry averages, and they were following a SPOC process. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is this. It is very possible to perform well in the service desk independent of desktop support. It's very possible to perform well in desktop support independent of the service desk. But in some cases, you're going to be sub-optimized if you are not performing well as a group. In other words, what do they look like together? Are your costs below where they should be for an integrated support organization? Is your customer satisfaction above the industry average if you are operating as an integrated support organization? And so what this company decided to do was to benchmark their performance and tie 50% of the annual bonus to their benchmarking results. Now, many of you have benchmarked before, and you know that benchmarking involves comparing your performance to the performance of an appropriate peer group. The more important piece, though, is to ask yourself, where the benchmarking peer group is outperforming us, what do they do, and what can we learn from that, and how can we improve our own performance? You see, given enough time, any support organization can improve its performance and can achieve world-class performance, but benchmarking enables you to get there more quickly. You can bypass all the trial and error associated with incremental improvements. You can avoid all the blood, sweat, and tears associated with that trial and error, and you can improve your performance not at an evolutionary pace, but at a revolutionary pace by building upon the industry's proven best practices. And that's the real value of benchmarking, is that it enables you to leapfrog across all the trial and error and incrementalism and achieve world-class performance in a relatively short period of time. Now, for those that are interested, we offer free white papers on our website, and we do have a white paper on the website about benchmarking the support organization if you're interested in downloading that. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive on some of the more common key performance indicators for level 1 service desk and desktop support, because it's important to understand not only these KPIs, but more importantly, the cause-effect relationship between these KPIs so that this case study will make sense to you. What I'm showing on page 21 are some of the more common service desk metrics. There are cost metrics, quality metrics, productivity, agent or technician metrics, service level, and call handling metrics, and there are literally hundreds more. What I'm showing you on this page are the 25 most important KPIs for the service desk. But more important than understanding the KPIs is understanding the cause-effect relationship for these KPIs. And again, we're talking about service desk KPIs. The foundation metrics are cost per ticket and customer satisfaction. What I mean by that is that the two most important metrics for both desktop support and the service desk are cost per ticket and customer satisfaction. Everything you do in these support organizations boils down to one of two things. How do I contain costs, and how do I maximize customer satisfaction? Well, we know that cost is driven by agent productivity, or specifically agent utilization. These are labor-intensive functions, and any serious effort to contain cost has to look at personnel productivity. Customer satisfaction is driven by first contact resolution rate. Then we got a third-tier set of metrics that drive those. We've got agent satisfaction driving customer satisfaction, as well as absenteeism and turnover, which in turn impacts your cost per ticket. And then we've got some metrics that impact agent satisfaction and first contact resolution rate. The metrics in red are the ones that are the most important. That's why they're color-coded in red. These we believe to be the single most important metrics for level 1 support. If you understand these cause and effect relationships, you're in a very powerful position to pull the levers that you need to pull to achieve desired outcomes. If you want to reduce your cost per ticket, the agents have got to become more productive. If you want to increase your first contact resolution, your customer satisfaction, you got to increase your first contact resolution rate. Now we can go through the same brief exercise with desktop support metrics. I'm showing 7 categories of metrics here, including ticket handling metrics and workload metrics. Workload metrics such as the number of tickets per seat per month, the number of incidents per seat per month, service requests per seat per month, and so on. Once again, there are literally hundreds of desktop support metrics. There are 30 metrics on this page. This really just scratches the surface. The ones that are important are going to be shown in this build here. We start with cost per ticket, driven by utilization, and FCR for incidents. We've got service levels, including mean time to resolve, which do make a difference for desktop support. Your service levels for the service desk, service levels like ASA, average speed of answer, and call abandonment rate, really don't drive customer satisfaction in that environment. But your service levels do drive customer satisfaction and, to a lesser extent, utilization in the desktop support environment. So if you understand these cause and effect relationships, once again, it puts you in a very powerful position to say, okay, if we focus on increasing technician satisfaction by providing appropriate coaching, career pathing, and training, we can expect to see an increase in customer satisfaction. Or if we improve our mean time to resolve on tickets in desktop support, we can expect to see an increase in customer satisfaction. Or if we improve our mean time to resolve, I think our technician utilization is likely to improve and our cost per ticket will go down. Now, the key KPIs, key performance indicators for successful collaboration that this organization developed include the 5 that are shown on this page. We have a weighted average cost per ticket for service desk at level 1 in desktop support. We had a weighted average customer satisfaction. We had first level resolution rate, which is our TCO metric for level 1. And we have the percentage of tickets resolved by desktop support that could have been resolved at level 1. That's our desktop TCO measure. And finally, we always recommend adopting a balanced scorecard. Now, for those that are interested, once again, we have white papers on our website. You can download those free of charge, go into a lot more detail on the KPIs that really matter for both level 1 support and desktop support. Let me show you how this organization put together a SPOC scorecard that looked at the performance of the combined level 1 support and desktop support. They had 2 cost metrics in their scorecard, 2 quality metrics in their scorecard, and 2 TCO metrics in their scorecard. They put a weight on each one of those metrics. They, of course, add to 100%. This is a bit subjective, but these represent, for this particular organization, where they felt the key weighting should go. Then for a benchmarking peer group, they looked at data that said, okay, what's the worst case scenario on cost per ticket for the service desk? Well, it's around $40. What's the best case? It's around $8, and so on. For each of these metrics, they recorded a value for the worst possible case and the best possible case. They put their own data in this column here. I'm actually using some industry average data in this particular column right here. And then you can calculate a metric score using this formula down here. You take the worst case and you subtract your own performance and you divide that by the range, worst case minus the best case. And you come up with a score between 0 and 100%. The higher scores are indicative of performance closer to the high end of the range. The last thing you do on this scorecard is you multiply the metric score by the metric weighting to come up with a balanced score for each metric. And when you add those together, you come up with a balanced score for the combined Level 1 and desktop support organizations. Their score was about 67%. Now, you might look at this and say, well, that doesn't sound like a real high score. But the reality is when we take hundreds of support organizations worldwide and we run them through this algorithm, the average score is only about 50%. And anything over 62% is top quartile. Second quartile run from about 50 to 62%. Third quartile is from 38 to 50%. And anything under 38% is fourth quartile. The beauty of the scorecard is this. We're looking at aggregate performance of Level 1 support, the service desk, as well as desktop support, and we're aggregating cost metrics, quality metrics, and TCO metrics into a single all-inclusive measure of performance that can be tracked over time. These blue bars here represent a scorecard that's being tracked every month of the year through a 12-month period of time, and you can see that the trend is in the right direction. The purple background here represents the 12-month trailing average. The balanced scorecard also enables you to benchmark against other support organizations. Here's our score, 66.9%. Remember, we calculated that back here. The orange bar here represents the score we just calculated. The scores range from a low of 17.5% to a high of 83.3%. So the balanced scorecard enables you to track and trend your overall performance over time, and it also enables you to fairly benchmark your support organization versus other support organizations. So what were the results of benchmarking and shared incentives? Remember, 50% of their bonus was tied to how they performed on a benchmark. Before they did the benchmark, their service desk cost per ticket was $22. A year later, it was $19. Desktop support cost per ticket had gone from $64 to $62. The quality, customer satisfaction for the service desk had increased by 7 percentage points. For desktop support, it had increased by 3 percentage points. The Level 1 resolution rate for the service desk had gone from 88 to 91%, and the percent resolved Level 1 capable had dropped from 8% to 4%. The balanced score went from 66.9, that score right there, to 75.5 a year later. And the bonus that was awarded based upon these shared incentives went from 42.3% of the bonus pool to almost 64% of the bonus pool. That's the power of collaboration. That's the power of shared incentives for the service desk and desktop support. There's real synergy here, and it is possible to sub-optimize each of these support organizations independently. It's only by looking at them as an entire support process that you can gain this competitive advantage, that you can take advantage of these synergies. So that brings us to the second set of polling questions for the day. And since we were talking about benchmarking, I've got a couple of polling questions related to benchmarking. And the first polling question is this. Have you benchmarked your support organization within the past year? Yes, no, or not applicable, since we have quite a few people on today's webcast that are not affiliated with a support organization. So yes, no, or not applicable. We've got about 60% participation. We'd like to get that number up to about 80 to 90%. So please weigh in on this. Have you benchmarked your support organization within the past year? And while you're doing that, let me just say thanks for joining us, Mark Jenkins. Thanks for joining us, Max Lowe. Thanks for joining us, William Hazelrig, Tricia Barrow, Tim Bradshaw. We've got people from all 50 states on the webcast today and more than 40 countries. Thank you for joining us on today's webcast. Okay, let me go ahead and close that poll down and share the results with you. Have you benchmarked your support organization within the past year? 27% of you have, 60% of you have not benchmarked your support organization within the last year. For those who have not benchmarked within the past year, I want to encourage you to strongly think about doing this. Our experience has been that benchmarking is the quickest, most effective way to help an organization avoid all the trial and error associated with incremental improvement and achieve world-class performance in a relatively short period of time. Okay, let me open one more polling question related to benchmarking, and the polling question is this. Do you plan to benchmark your support organization in the future? You've got 5 choices here. Yes, within the next 90 days. Yes, within the next 6 months. Yes, within the next year, or no plans to benchmark at this time. And then, of course, those that are not affiliated with a support organization, you've got the not applicable answer. Okay, we've got 70% participation at this point. Give you another few seconds here to weigh in on this particular question. Do you plan to benchmark your support organization in the future? Please weigh in if you haven't voted yet. Okay, let me go ahead and close that poll down, share the results with you. Okay, 12% of you planning to benchmark within the next 90 days, 14% within the next 6 months, 26% within the next year, and slightly more than a third of you, 36%, don't have any plans to benchmark at this time. This is a fairly typical result. Once again, for those of you that are planning to benchmark, I do want to encourage you and offer you some support to move forward with that, because what we have found is that benchmarking is the quickest, most efficient way for an organization to achieve world-class performance. Time and cost associated with benchmarking is relatively insignificant compared to the benefits that are achieved as a result of benchmarking. Okay, let's take a look at our fourth case study. Here's the scenario. This was a Fortune 100 telecommunications company. You'd recognize the name if I told you who it was. They were conducting monthly meetings between the service desk and desktop support to ensure proper CTI, category type incident. You've probably heard that before, and to eliminate tickets through root cause analysis. Some people call it closed ticket analysis. Benchmarks showed that their FLR, first level resolution rate at the service desk, was low, and nearly half the tickets resolved by desktop support were resolvable at level 1. Remember that metric, percent resolved level 1 capable. It sounds complicated, but it simply is a measure of defects. That is, defective tickets that are moved from level 1 to desktop support that could and should have been resolved at level 1. I'm going to share some data slides with you from our benchmarking database over the next 3 or 4 slides that I think you'll find quite interesting. On page 33, what you're looking at is a distribution of the percentage of tickets resolved by desktop support that could and should have been resolved at level 1. And we've got the number of support organizations shown over here. This is a histogram. And what it says is that if the number of tickets resolved by your desktop support that could have been resolved at level 1 is less than 12.7%, you're in the first quartile. If you're between 12.7 and 18.1%, you're in the second quartile. If you're between 18.1 and 24.3%, you're in the third quartile. And if you're resolving more than 24% of your tickets at desktop support that could and should have been resolved at level 1, you're in the fourth quartile. These are costly defects. We saw that earlier. Average cost of resolution at level 1, $22. Average cost of resolution at desktop support, more than $60. What about level 1 resolution rates? Well, same thing. We take a histogram, and we find that the average level 1 resolution rate is 74%, but it ranges from a high of about 98% to a low of 24%. Only 2% of support organizations, level 1 service desks, achieve a first-level resolution rate greater than 95%. Okay, now what about remote diagnostic software? This is an interesting one. Does it help increase first contact and first level resolution rates? The answer is yes, and here's the data to prove it. The blue diamonds and the pink, hot pink, or fuchsia squares represent data points. The blue diamonds indicate those support organizations that have a remote diagnostic tool. The fuchsia-colored squares represent those support organizations that do not have a remote diagnostic tool. What we're looking at is level 1 resolution rates. For those organizations that do not have a remote diagnostic tool, their average FLR, first level resolution rate, is 61.4%. For support organizations that do have a remote diagnostic tool, the average first level resolution rate is almost 78%. This is huge. This has a big impact on total cost of ownership. Let's look at one more chart, and then we're going to talk about what this organization did. If we look at the maturity of the knowledge base, and MetricNet is a proprietary scale where we look at maturity on a 1 to 5 scale, 5 being most mature, 1 being least mature, and we compare this to first level resolution rates. Blue diamonds are data points. Of course, they're stacked up at these integers based upon maturity. The red line represents a linear regression through the data, and you can see that as the knowledge base matures, the first level resolution rate increases. The same thing is true with first contact resolution rate. As the knowledge base matures, FCR goes up. So here was the action plan. They decided as a result of this that they were going to adopt a remote diagnostic tool, put a checkbox on the trouble ticket for desktop support, indicating when there were tickets that they resolved that could and should have been resolved at level 1. They put a goal in place for first level resolution at the service desk. They established a goal for the percent resolved level 1 capable, and they enforced a strict single point of contact support model. Here's what happened after 6 months. First level resolution rates increased from 61 to 83%. The percent resolved level 1 capable, number of tickets resolved at desktop support that could have been resolved at level 1, dropped from 44% to 17%. The weighted average cost per ticket dropped from $96 to $61. This case study, more than any other, encapsulates the real benefit of collaboration. Higher first level resolution rates, hence lower total cost of ownership. Fewer defects, that is lower percent resolved level 1 capable, lower aggregate cost per ticket when you look at a weighted cost for level 1 support and desktop support. This brings us to our final set of polling questions for the day. Let me go ahead and open final 2 polling questions. And the first one is this: does your remote support solution allow for collaboration between service desk and desktop support? Now, if you don't have a remote diagnostic tool, you're going to answer not applicable. But if you do, hopefully you'll be able to answer this question. Does your remote support solution allow for collaboration between the service desk and desktop support? Okay, we've got a 60% vote going here. Let's see if we can get that number up to about 80%. Please weigh in on this if you haven't done so. Give you another few seconds to weigh in on this. And then we will close this poll out, share the results with you. Okay, 64% of you have a remote diagnostic tool that allows collaboration between the service desk and desktop support. 15% do not. And 22% of you said not applicable. And I'm guessing that for some of you, it's because you don't work in a support organization, but for some of you, it may be because you don't have a support tool. Now, there's a follow-on question here. This is our final poll of today's webcast. And the follow-on question is this: what is the biggest challenge when using remote support? Is it connection issues? If it doesn't work off network, or when the VPN is down? Is it weak collaboration, or is it some other issue, or not applicable as the case might be? So our final polling question of today's webcast, and then we'll get on with the remainder of our webcast. What is the biggest challenge when using remote support? Okay, we've got 60% of you having voted. Please vote if you haven't done so. We like to get that number up to 80 to 85, maybe 90%. Most of you have weighed in now. We're at 75%. Please vote if you haven't done so. Okay. Let me go ahead and close that poll down and share the results with you. Okay, for 37% of you, it's connection issues. That's the biggest challenge. Another 15% of you find that it doesn't work off network or when the VPN is down. Weak collaboration, 18%. And then 25% of you indicate that there are other issues, 19% not applicable. Okay, very interesting information. Key thing I want you to keep in mind here is that the data shows that having a tool like this can greatly improve the level 1 and the first contact resolution rates. So I'm going to share some final thoughts with you on collaboration with service desk and desktop support. And I want to start with what I call the paradox of IT support. And the paradox is this: less than 5% of all IT spending is allocated to end-user support. So if you're in an organization that spends $100 million per year on end-user support, less than 5% of that will be allocated typically to the service desk, desktop support, and field support. Now, because this amount is so small, many organizations erroneously assume that there's little upside opportunity in IT support. The result is that most organizations are managed with the goal of minimizing costs, but the most effective support strategies focus on maximizing value. And there's 3 important sources of value that you've got to understand here. And the first one is this on page 43. Customer satisfaction with all of IT, not just support, but all of IT, is driven by the quality of support at the service desk and desktop support. Now, this is a survey that MetricNet conducted a couple of years ago. More than 1,000 large cap organizations worldwide. We gave them a multiple choice question, nearly 30 choices. They were allowed to pick up to 3, which is why these numbers add to more than 100%. And the stunning result was that service desk and desktop support, even though they represent less than 5% of total spending in an organization, the biggest driver of customer satisfaction with all of IT is based upon interactions that end users have with the service desk and desktop support. Now, this makes sense because most end users don't hang out in the data center. They don't hang out in the NOC. They're not calling up application developers and maintenance people, but they do have contact with IT through the service desk and desktop support. So if I'm a CIO and I see this, it's very clear what I need to do. I need to make investments not just in tools and headcount and technology to drive the best possible experience at these interfaces, but I need to make sure that I devote enough of my personal time and attention to ensure that customers have a positive experience with these support organizations, because that is the key to driving customer satisfaction for all of IT, and that, by proxy, is an indication of how good a job I'm doing with the organization. We've also found that the quality of support drives end-user productivity. Now, this is the real economic value of support. This is based upon a survey that MetricNet did a little less than a year ago. We looked at service desk and desktop support, and we found that the average knowledge worker in North America loses about 33 productive hours a year because of various IT outages, software glitches, password resets, and the like. However, for those organizations that performed in the top quartile on customer satisfaction and FCR and mean time to resolve for both service desk and desktop support, the average knowledge worker lost only 17 hours of productive time. But for those that did not perform as well, they were in the bottom quartile on customer satisfaction, first contact resolution rate, mean time to resolve for both service desk and desktop support, the average knowledge worker lost about 47 hours of productive time a year. That's a huge difference. We've got about 30 productive hours lost per year per user between the top performer and the bottom performer. That's huge. If I've got 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 or more end users in the organization, multiply that by the 30 hours of lost productivity between a top quartile support organization and a bottom quartile support organization, and you can see that a top performing support organization in the top quartile returns real productive hours to their end users. So having a strong support organization isn't just a nice to have. It's not just motherhood and apple pie. It drives customer satisfaction with all of support, and it can create real economic value for the enterprise. And finally, collaboration allows an organization to minimize total cost of ownership, as you can see here. These are the three fundamental sources of leverage and value that a support organization can create. You can drive a positive view of all of IT, you can return productive hours to the enterprise, and you can help reduce total cost of ownership. So are there barriers? Absolutely, there are barriers to collaboration, but they can and should be overcome. They are not insurmountable. The benefits are numerous, including lower support costs, better customer satisfaction for all of IT, shorter cycle times on resolution, enhanced user productivity, and again, greater customer satisfaction for all of IT. Now at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation back over to our sponsor today for a few words from them. So Mike, I'm turning the presentation over to you, and when Mike is finished, I will have a few closing remarks, and I will also answer any questions that you typed in during the webcast. So Mike, it's all yours.
Great, thanks Jeff. Before we get into some more detail, and to break things up a bit, we thought we'd take 2.5 minutes to show a fun yet highly educational video regarding Bomgar's approach to secure remote support and collaboration.
In an ideal world, technology would always work perfectly. In reality, it doesn't. And as technology evolves, tech support becomes exponentially more complex. You're supporting desktops, laptops, and servers, smartphones, tablets, kiosks, and more. On top of that, employees and customers are bringing in their own personal devices. And all of these systems and devices are spread all over the world, both on and off your network. Pretty soon, it feels like all you can say, no. No, I can't support your iPad. No, I can only fix your laptop if you're in the office on our network. No, I can't fix your servers today. I'll have to drive out to you tomorrow. But with Bomgar, you can start saying yes. The Bomgar remote support solution enables you to remotely access and fix nearly any device, running any platform, located anywhere in the world. Access and fix an iPhone in Sydney while working on a laptop in London, and configuring a server in Sheboygan. See the screen, control the mouse, and fix the system as if you were standing directly in front of it. You can do all this from your office, or from your mobile device on the beach. Don't worry, we won't tell. And if you feel understaffed and overwhelmed, Bomgar's got you covered. No, we can't clone you, but we can enable you to work on multiple systems simultaneously, chat with multiple end users at once, and work with other reps in the same session so you can fix problems faster. Of course, you may know that remote access tools are the #1 pathway for hackers. Don't worry, Bomgar knows that too. Unlike old-school point-to-point remote access tools and cloud-based solutions, Bomgar routes all activity through a completely secure appliance that sits behind your own firewall. We call it the Bomgar box, but you'll call it peace of mind. With Bomgar, you'll improve first call resolution, decrease time to resolution, and increase productivity. Bomgar opens up a world of yes. Yes, I can solve your problem. Yes, I can support your device. Yes, I am awesome. Thank you. It's the perfect support solution in an imperfect world. Just ask our customers. Visit Bomgar.com to sign up for a free trial.
Okay, thank you. That was just have a little bit of break there. Love the metrics, and I love the statistics and the empirical data that MetricNet provides, and thought that would just be a good break in the details. But to get back into what Bomgar is doing and to tie it back to some of the information that Jeff had provided, I'm certain that many of you subscribe to Information Week and may recall receiving the 2012 IT Spending Priorities Report from earlier this year. It's another example of how relevant the information provided by MetricNet is to the information technologies into your company's business. As you can see from this chart, the number 3 and number 4 business technology priorities are to create better internal and external customer service. This study was done with companies like yours and with contacts within the organization with people like yourselves. As touched on by Jeff earlier, and this should look familiar to some of you who have been on previous MetricNet webinars, the number one driver for customer satisfaction is first contact resolution. Now, I have to admit that it's almost obvious that if you resolve the incident on your first call, your customer's going to be happy. And if they have to wait for a dispatch or someone from Tier 2 or Tier 3 support to call them back, then they're not quite so happy. In addition to the costs involved, as Jeff points out, to dispatch someone, there is the lost productivity cost of the employee. Thus, finding ways to improve FCR is not only good for the customer satisfaction, it's also a great way to drive down cost of support. Again, it's somewhat obvious, but it's great to have the empirical data and charts from MetricNet to back this up and help you with your business case to invest in your support team. Also somewhat obvious is this next chart. Again, if it takes too long to fix the problem, your customers aren't so happy. At Bomgar, one of the many things that we do to increase first contact resolution and decrease repair times is we do this through collaboration. And we do this by providing a solution that enables the technician to very quickly and easily remotely support the end user's device. In the example on the right, let's assume that we're dealing with a healthcare organization that's using, say, Epic or Cerner for their patient care system. The level 1 technician is contacted by a nurse or doctor using either the telephone or Bomgar chat integrated with your self-service portal. The doctor might be using a Wintel device while level 1 is on a MacBook. Now, the common scenario with health organizations I've worked with is level 1 might want to bring in a subject matter expert, and heaven forbid that level 3 technician, the subject matter expert for Epic, leaves the office and goes outside and possibly goes to Starbucks, and all he or she has with them is their iPad. What we're able to do with Bomgar is still allow that technician to securely come into session even though they're off network. Let's take it one step further. Let's assume for the moment that the subject matter expert really needs some help and has determined that it's a problem with the application itself. What we can also do with Bomgar is we can do an external invitation and bring in the vendor's technical support. In this case, for purposes of the discussion, it might be a developer on the Epic software development team who's never heard of Bomgar before. So think of it as a one-time use representative console that they download. They, again, come into session. Everything is secure. Everything is audited. And now we allow for multiple technicians to not just talk or chat, but actually to be able to take corrective action by seeing and going on to that end user's device to fix the problem. One of the benefits of Bomgar collaboration capability is that it can happen in real time and it's independent of the platform. After all, not everyone is using a Windows device. In addition, the level 1 support representative can watch and learn about how Tier 2, Tier 3, or the vendor resolve the issue and receive on-the-job training. And finally, as we'll show a little bit later in details about the remote support session, including a flash video recording of the entire session, can be integrated back to your ticketing system or ITSM platform. Incidentally, this scenario can be played out in your organization. Just simply replace the nurse or doctor with, say, someone in your finance team and substitute Siebel as an example for Epic. Could be Banner as an example. I know we have a lot of higher education customers substituting, Banner in the system versus your faculty and staff. So any key system, we can really use collaboration to bring in multiple support technicians to really drive down repair times and, importantly, improve first contact resolution. This is just a view of what it looks like on the Bomgar representative console. I will point out here at the top, since Jeff had touched on earlier about agent efficiency, each one of these tabs represents another session. And with Bomgar, the technician can have multiple sessions going on simultaneously, possibly controlling a BlackBerry, waiting for a Wintel device to reboot while working on a MacBook. In our scenario, those 3 sessions for Bomgar represents 1 license. But here what I'm also trying to point out, especially as it relates to collaboration, is that these buttons here on the top right allow for the first level technician to invite other representatives and other teams to come into session and be able to look at and see what's happening on that end user device, as well as invite external representatives, as described previously, external to the support organization. So how Bomgar works is we allow the support technician using any type of device, again, Wintel, Linux, MacBook, can also be using your iPad. Oftentimes when I'm at trade shows and seminars, I show how I can use my iPhone to go out and control an end device. Now, I typically use it by showing system information, looking at the top processes, maybe events that have happened on that device, without necessarily going into full screen sharing. Of course, can do full screen sharing with an iPhone, but it's a little bit awkward given the screen real estate. So we do recommend that your primary interface, of course, be something like an iPad or Wintel, Linux, MacBook. So the support technician is able to go out, and what we describe as an attended session, we allow them to take over control of any sort of device without having to have pre-installed software, so that the person that's needing support, again on a Wintel, MacBook, Linux, BlackBerry, etc., can come into the support process in the incident management lifecycle and allow that support technician to take over control. We do not require VPN access. So if your CFO is traveling to London and they're on a public Wi-Fi network in their hotel room, you can securely take over control of the device as long as they have internet connectivity. We do allow for, as well, what we call unattended systems on the lower right-hand side, where we can go out and take control of a server at a remote location. Particularly in retail, we can also go out and take control of a point-of-sales cash register. So whether it's retail or healthcare, a lot of compliance issues come into play. If it's retail PCI compliance, there would be concern that the technician takes control of the point-of-sales cash register and sees credit card data. Where in healthcare, you might be concerned about whether or not Mike saw sensitive clinical information. So we do make sure that the session is very secure. We highly recommend tying into LDAP and Active Directory. A lot of our retail organizations will tie into Radius and use multi-factor authentication to ensure that it really is a tech support representative. Finally, we do support both a physical appliance as well as a virtual appliance. As I mentioned earlier, our licensing model is one of concurrency. It's based on concurrency of support representatives. So we don't care if you have 5,000 or 50,000 devices. We're not licensing based upon that. And we're also, because we're a concurrent model, we're allowing all the technicians in the IT support function that should have access to remote support in the incident management lifecycle to be able to use Bomgar without you having to incur a monthly subscription fee for everyone in your team. Again, one of the advantages of the concurrent license model. But don't take our word for it. We have a number of case studies and customer quotes available on our website. A few are shown here. And sticking with the theme of metrics, one of our customer quotes, again up on our website, shows how in one day they had their support representatives taking advantage of the Bomgar solution. Their call escalations decreased by 80%. On-site visits decreased by 80 to 90%. Incidents in which Bomgar sessions were used, call times were reduced by 50 to 75%, and first call resolution has increased by 40 to 50%. Again, there's a lot of case studies up on our website. Another one of our customers was a large airline, had to pay for outsourced dispatch service calls out to various airports. During a proof of concept with Bomgar, we're able to show the number of incidents that did not require dispatch and could be resolved remotely simply by tying back into their incident management platform. As you saw on the previous slide, we integrate to all the leading players, major ticketing systems, ITSM platforms. Today they have over 200 service desk technicians with the ability to use Bomgar. The return on investment, because during the proof of concept we were able to show a dramatic reduction in calls that were no longer need to be dispatched but could be resolved on first level, the return on investment was 2.5 months. So we encourage you to try Bomgar for yourself and see how we can affect cost per ticket, see how we affect customer satisfaction by avoiding dispatches, by increasing first contact resolution, and driving down repair times, providing a solution that increases agent satisfaction. That goes back to our Net Promoter Scores. Again, customers that are using Bomgar, and we had just shy of 500 of our customers sign up for this webinar, so thank you everyone who is joining in today. And for those of you who are not Bomgar customers, we'd encourage you to visit our website and give us a try. If you notice on the right-hand side, just click on Try Bomgar, and feel free as well to contact myself with any comments or questions. And back to you, Jeff.
Hey, Mike, thank you for that nice overview of Bomgar. In a moment here, I'm going to be taking questions. So for any of you who have typed in questions during the webcast, I'm going to address those right now. And if you do have a question that you haven't typed in, please type it in the dialog box in the lower right-hand corner, and I'm going to answer as many of these as I can right now. So I'm just opening up that dialog window. I'm going to start with a question here from Anna. Can we get a copy of the presentation? Yes, you can. Just complete the questionnaire that pops up when you log out of the GoToWebinar, and we'll send you a copy of today's presentation, Anna. Okay, what constitutes cost per seat? Ritesh, what we do is we add up all of the technician costs, that is salaries and benefits, plus any contractor costs for desktop support, salaries and benefits. We also add up the cost of the indirect personnel, the team leads, the supervisors, the workforce schedulers, the QA/QC people, and the trainers. That goes into the cost. We also look at facilities cost. That is the cost of the space that desktop support occupies. We look at telecommunications cost, technology expense, that is for software licenses, et cetera. We look at desktop technology costs. We look at travel, training, office supplies. It is a fully loaded cost divided by the number of seats supported. So cost per seat is fully loaded cost divided by all the seats that are supported. Now, that number will vary dramatically from organization to organization, depending upon such things as the volume of contacts per seat per month. In some organizations, it's less than 1/2 of 1 ticket per seat per month. In some organizations, it's as many as 3 tickets per seat per month. It will also depend upon the density of the user population. It is much less costly to support users in a very dense environment, such as a high-rise office building, versus an organization that's spread out over a vast geographic area because it takes time to get to the site of the user, so-called travel time. So the cost per seat will vary dramatically based upon a variety of factors. Okay, question from Joe. What's meant by field support? A lot of people consider field support the same thing as desktop support. However, we make a distinction. When in desktop support, the technician goes to the site of the user but doesn't have to get in a vehicle to go see the user. In field support, this would be, for example, if you're supporting ATMs throughout a region or ATMs, automated teller machines in a particular geography, chances are you're going to be in a vehicle driving from site to support those. Or even if you are a desktop support for a regional branch network for retail banking, chances are you're going to be driving from one branch to another to provide troubleshooting. Field support is a form of desktop support, but typically involves longer travel times and involves getting in a vehicle to move from site to site. Okay, from Greg, can you define the levels of support, particularly what is the industry difference between desktop and field? Okay, I think I just answered that question. We define field support as involving larger distances, typically getting into a vehicle to go from ticket to ticket. Okay, from Chris, I was taking notes on the slide for the drivers of desktop support. I'm not sure I understand the question there. Perhaps you didn't type the whole question in. Okay. From Bill, I run a service desk in higher ed. We do not calculate cost per ticket as we do not charge back to the campus, and we're simply part of the budget. Is there a balanced scorecard I can use that does not rely on cost per ticket? Sure there is. You just take the scorecard that we showed you and you take cost per ticket out and you reweight the other metrics in the scorecard so that they add up to 100%. So of course you can take it out, but I would encourage you to perhaps think about the costs you're incurring, because you might not charge back to the campus, but there still is a cost associated with the service that you're delivering. And we believe it's important to understand that cost, because delivering world-class support is not just about exceeding customer expectations. It's not just about achieving a high level of customer satisfaction. It is also about containing costs. So even though you might not be charging your cost back to the campus, there's a real cost associated with the support that you deliver. And I believe that that cost is important to track. If it's not part of your scorecard, at least track the metrics separately. But on the scorecard, yeah, absolutely. You can take that out. You can substitute any other metric or not substitute another metric. The methodology is very robust. And the mechanics of developing the scorecard and updating the scorecard periodically, monthly or quarterly, are the same, regardless of which metrics you have in that scorecard. Okay, from Jeff. What do you mean by remote diagnostic software? We're talking about tools like Bomgar that enable you to proxy into a user's device or environment and do the troubleshooting without having to go on site. From Paul, what is HDI versus MetricNet? Well, HDI is an association of service and support professionals. We are on the strategic advisory board for HDI. We provide complementary services to them and vice versa. So HDI is an industry association for service and support professionals. MetricNet is a commercial organization that does benchmarking for service and support professionals. Okay, from Jason, we use Bomgar and love it. That's great. Okay, I'm glad to hear that, Jason. From Dave, how do you determine when a ticket is level 1 capable? There's a couple of different ways we do that, Dave. One is to have self-reporting by the desktop support technicians, and if they believe that a ticket could have been resolved at level 1, they check a box that says level 1 resolvable. That helps get you in the ballpark. But more importantly, what we believe needs to happen is you take experienced technicians for both level 1 and desktop support, and you have them sample a certain number of tickets every month. Let's say you handle 5,000 tickets a month, you might sample 50 of those tickets and look at those resolved by desktop support. How many of those could have been resolved at level 1? That sampling is probably the best way to identify what the level 1 capable percentage is. Okay, from David, how do I get a link to the presentation? We're going to email out a link to the presentation at the conclusion or sometime in the next 24 hours. From Michael, how do you minimize desktop support drive-bys? Agent is in the field taking care of a ticket but gets asked by several users to help with another problem. Well, the right process is to encourage those users to call service desk directly, and if the service desk ascertains that they can resolve remotely, they will. And if they can't, they can immediately dispatch you in the presence of these individuals that need support. So you don't have to abandon the individuals, but to be true to the SPOC single point of contact process, those users should be encouraged to call the level 1 service desk, get the ticket logged. They should be informed that you are standing by in the event that level 1 believes that the ticket should be dispatched to desktop support. Okay. From Mark, does your FCR consider phone contact only, or does it take into account other forms of contact with the service desk or desktop support? Ideally, FCR should look at all forms of contact. So you've got chat, you've got email, you've got voice contacts. There's a little bit of debate about what constitutes first contact resolution on an email. But what seems to be emerging in the industry is a de facto standard that says that an email that is resolved within an hour counts as first contact resolution. Now, there's no universal agreement on that, but that is the de facto standard that appears to be emerging. One implication of that, Mark, is that it's important to manage that email queue real time. In other words, don't wait till the end of the day to look at your emails. Don't even wait 2 hours to look at your emails. That email queue ought to be managed almost real time along with the live calls that are coming in, because you want to encourage customers to use that email queue, or that email channel, I should say. That helps smooth out the workload profile, and that's beneficial for the service desk and desktop support. But if they learn through experience that if they fill out an email ticket and they don't hear back for 4 hours or 8 hours or 2 days, they're not going to use that channel. So it's important to manage those non-live channels like email almost in real time, just like the voice calls. So FCR still applies, even if you're talking about a channel like web chat or email in addition to voice. From Greg, we use Bomgar currently. Current support for the iOS devices exists. Let's see. Okay, it's a fairly complex question, Greg. I would encourage you to follow up with Bomgar on that because it sounds to me like it's a question specific to your deployment of Bomgar. So rather than take up time in this Q&A session, I would encourage you to contact Bomgar directly about that. Okay, question from David. What are the key action steps to improve level 1 resolution rates? Several things you can do, David. Some of them were outlined in the 4 case studies that we went through. One of them is to simply have a level 1 resolution rate goal. Well, first of all, you need to track level 1 resolution rates. Remember, our first polling question was, do you track first level resolution, and do you have a single point of contact service desk? So the first thing is that you have to track first level resolution rate. The second thing you need to do is make sure that you have a performance goal in place for first level resolution rate. And then thirdly, what you ought to be doing every month is looking at the tickets that get escalated from level 1 to the desktop and other end-level support organizations and determining which ones could and should have been resolved at level 1 and making sure that you try and minimize those through training, through technology, and other capabilities that enable you to maximize that level 1 resolution rate. Okay, from Jason. Does MetricNet work with all service desk platforms in order to benchmark? The short answer is yes. The platform that you're on is independent of how we benchmark an organization. It doesn't matter to us if you've got, whose ticketing system you have, whose remote diagnostic system you have. It really is independent. Our benchmarks are largely technology agnostic. You don't have to have a particular technology to be benchmarked. What tool is best to get customer sat score? This is from Tim. There's a lot of tools out there. We don't endorse any particular tool, but it is important to have a way to gather customer satisfaction data and to be able to do it on an ongoing basis. You don't want to just survey once a year or even twice a year. You want to be sending out surveys on an ongoing basis. There are plenty of good tools out there. Again, we don't endorse any particular tool site, so I want to stop short of mentioning any particular tools. Okay, from Doug. Do different methods of contact change the variables very much? For example, click-to-chat more effective than phone solutions. In general, customer satisfaction goes up when customers have channel choice. So if they have a choice of a live voice call, an email, or a live chat session, just giving them that choice oftentimes improves the customer satisfaction. They will decide over time which channel they want to use. If they like chatting better than they like a live voice, if they like email better than they like chatting or live voice, they're going to use that channel. The key thing is to make sure that you're offering a quality solution regardless of the channel. Too often what we find is that support organizations will adopt a new channel. They'll adopt the email channel or they'll adopt a web chat channel, but they don't manage it very well, and customers very quickly get scared away from it and they stop using that channel, and that's not good because, as I mentioned earlier, the more channel choice the users have, the higher the customer satisfaction is, and that helps even out the workload because typically somebody who sends an email request in doesn't expect quite the same speed of response as they would in a live voice or a live chat. So we find that channel choice is good. It by itself increases customer satisfaction, but you have to manage it well. You can't just offer a channel and then not offer quality, quick turnaround time through that channel. Okay, there's a question here about how Bomgar connects to mobile devices, and that's from Jackie. Mike, I'm not sure if you're still on, but if you are, can you say something? You might be in a better position to answer this question than I am, and the question is, how does Bomgar connect to mobile devices?
Sure. Yeah, with a couple of different ways. With BlackBerrys in particular, one of the things that we do is we deploy, and we do this with desktops as well. We have the ability to deploy a Bomgar button. Think of it as an easy button, so that you can just simply click on the button and be able to go in and launch a remote support session out to the support teams. Other scenarios do include opening up a browser and going to the the self-service portal. And finally, I do want to set proper expectations. Nobody in the industry can do full remote control of the iOS platform. Although, as I described, you can use the iOS platform, your iPhone, your iPad, to go out and control another device, but to control it, nobody in the industry can do that. So what we have in that scenario is we have an application that you get from the App Store, and you can then do a co-browsing session to an iPhone or to an iPad. Frankly, we're doing more than any other vendor in the industry to support iOS, but I did want to make sure that the expectations were met with regards to iOS.
Mike, thank you for that input. Okay, moving on the questions. This one is from Matthew. By shifting resolution from level 2 to level 1, the only way to truly reduce total cost of ownership is to reduce level 2 resources. Headcount reduction is what you mean, and that's a parenthetical element from me. Any ideas on how to handle this objection, the objections associated with this? Yeah, it's the right thing to do for the organization. And if there is a way to move tickets from level 2 or desktop support to level 1, and that reduces the need for headcount at level 2, it's just the right thing to do. That's the short answer. And I understand that there are organizational issues, there are turf issues, there are politics, there's a lot associated with that, and there are always going to be objections when you're talking about somebody's job. Now, attrition is fairly high in support organizations. It's higher at level 1 than it is in desktop support. But that attrition can work in your favor if you are trying to downsize. On average, what we found is that you can replace 2 desktop support personnel with 1 level 1 support personnel. And I don't want you to misinterpret what I'm saying here, but what I am saying is that the greater efficiency of support at level 1 enables you to take the workload of 2 desktop support technicians and complete that workload with a single level 1 resource. And that's really the benefit of resolving tickets at level 1 if you possibly can. So these defects where a ticket goes from level 1 to desktop support are costly to the organization because in general, if a ticket can be resolved at level 1, the level 1 technician can resolve 2 tickets for every 1 ticket that desktop support resolves on average we found in the industry. So attrition can work to your benefit here. And if you're attriting at desktop support, then you just, attrit down to the level that you need. If you don't have much attrition, you don't have much turnover, then you've got a little bit more of an issue. And in my opinion, any responsible chief CTO, chief information officer, or other manager within an organization has got to look at that and say, if there's an opportunity to save some money here, if we can replace, 4 desktop techs, 6 desktop, 8 desktop techs with half as many level 1 technicians, the short answer is it's the right thing to do, as painful as it might be. There's no easy way around the organizational issues, turf issues, and the political issues. Okay, from Tim. How can you automatically or easily calculate a call quality score? I don't think you can automatically get a call quality score. You can record calls using various tools, and then you can go through the calls with an expert who scores the call based upon the quality of the interaction, but I don't know of a way to, you can automatically record the call, but as I said, I don't know of a way to automatically or easily calculate a call quality score. There's some manual effort required anytime you're doing call quality monitoring. Okay, from Sherry, what method is used to capture the number of tickets that should have been resolved at level 1 and weren't? I think I addressed that question earlier, but the short answer and the best way to do it is to sample tickets closed by desktop support and other end levels of support on a monthly basis, and ask yourselves for each ticket that you sample, which of these could and should have been done at level 1? And you pull those out. Let's say you sample 100 tickets, and it turns out that 10 of them could and should have been resolved at level 1. Well, that's a pretty good indication that roughly 10% of the tickets being pushed out from level 1 could and should have been resolved at level 1. Usually the number is much higher than that. The industry average is about 22%. But ticket sampling is the best way to do it. Typically during the first couple months, you'll find that the number is relatively high, but once you follow up on those and you provide some training at level 1 about what can and should be done at level 1, you can get that number down fairly quickly. Okay, from Stephanie, are these results of your survey, are they the same in other regions, for example, EMEA? And the answer is yes, they're largely the same worldwide. Now the cost per ticket will vary based upon local labor rates. For example, if you look at the cost per ticket at level 1 in India or the Philippines, it's going to be much lower than it is in North America. But when we're talking about non-currency type things, that is metrics other than cost, like a percent resolved level 1 capable and some of those metrics, those are largely the same regardless of where you go in the world. Asia Pac, whether it's a developing or a developed country, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, it almost doesn't matter, Latin America. So when you're talking about non-currency metrics, that is non-cost metrics, they don't vary much by geography. The cost metrics, however, do vary depending upon local labor rates. From Chris, are the metrics available for public viewing? Yes, we're going to provide the presentation to you if you fill out the questionnaire at the end of the webcast. Okay, from Robert, what does your data show is the optimum ratio of supervisor to administrative staff to technicians? I'm not sure. I assume you're talking about desktop support, Robert. And we've seen the ratio range from 25 techs to 1 supervisor all the way down to 2 techs per supervisor. There's a huge range on the ratio of supervisor to technicians. What's the right range? It's difficult to say, but it is somewhere in the range of 7 to 10. That is 7 techs for every supervisor. It also depends upon whether or not your supervisors are doing tech work. For example, if things get busy, if the queue backs up, does the supervisor jump in and start resolving tickets? So there's a lot of factors that go into it. I don't want to give you a hard number, but what I will say is that what we have seen is that somewhere in the range of 7 to 10 techs for every supervisor appears to be about the right balance. Not too much supervision, not too little supervision. But as I mentioned, there are some exogenous factors like does the supervisor jump in and provide support when things get busy that will impact that ratio. Okay, from Saba. Saba, thank you for dialing in today. Does the total number of tickets on the slides include service requests as well, or are they incidents only? If we're talking about desktop support, Saba, those are both incidents and service requests. If we're talking about level 1 support, we're talking about primarily incidents. So I don't know specifically which slide you're talking about, so if you want to be more specific, I can tell you whether or not we're talking just incidents or a combination of incidents and service requests. At desktop support, we make a distinction because service requests are typically planned work, whereas incidents are typically unplanned work, like hardware break fixes. From Chris, there was a slide that showed the drivers of satisfaction for desktop support. Can you go back to that slide? What I'll tell you, Chris, is that desktop support is driven by first incident resolution rate. That is when a tech goes to the site of an end user and they solve the incident on first contact. That drives it. But service levels also count in desktop support, and that includes your mean time to resolve for both incidents and service requests. We measure those by elapsed business hours. So was it 8 elapsed business hours, 2 elapsed business hours, 72 elapsed business hours? MTTR, mean time to resolve for tickets, and mean time to resolve for incidents and mean time to resolve for service requests do impact your customer satisfaction. Okay, from Nate, do you have metrics for TCO differences between highly managed PC environments versus unmanaged environments? We don't specifically ask that question. And managed versus unmanaged oftentimes is a judgment call, meaning that you can't necessarily look at an environment and say that it's managed or unmanaged. Some organizations that think they have a managed PC environment don't, and some that don't think they have a managed PC environment do. So the short answer is we could probably make some rough estimations on what managed PC environments are and which ones are not managed PC environments. And when it comes to total cost of ownership, we don't see a huge difference, Nate, in TCO between the highly managed PC environments and the unmanaged environments. But that is just that is an empirical observation. We've not actually pulled the data, and I can't point to specific statistics that prove that. But based upon my empirical observation, I don't see a huge difference between TCO for managed and unmanaged environments. From Frank, we have 44,000 devices. What are the options for pushing out a button icon on each device to avoid the email notification needed to enter a session? There's a lot of different options there to avoid that email notification to enter into a particular session. Mike, I'm not sure if you want to jump in on this one. Are you familiar at all with this? The button icon, email notification needed to enter a particular session. Frank, I assume you're talking about a web chat session or a live support session. Mike, did you want to add anything at all to that? I just want to make sure that we cover all the bases here and I fully understand Frank's question.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, I'm not understanding the question, so I don't know if you can either read it again or if you want to just send me an email at
I'm going to ask Frank to elaborate a little bit. Frank, if you would, try and elaborate a little bit on your question so we can get to the bottom of it. Okay, from Tara, what's the best way to start a benchmark? The best way, Tara, is to get some internal commitment and support from your organization to do the benchmark, because at MetricNet what we found is that doing the benchmark is pretty easy. It doesn't take much time, doesn't cost a lot of money. Getting the internal support to fund the benchmark is really the biggest hurdle. So I would say the best way to start a benchmark is to get the backing internally at your organization, get some internal institutional support from people that say, yes, this is a good thing to do, we want to do it. That's the biggest barrier to doing a benchmark, is getting that internal support. So I would encourage you to line that up and then contact MetricNet and we can work with you to get that benchmark done. Okay, from Kevin. How does outsourcing your service desk affect first-level resolution rate? Our organization is looking at outsourcing the service desk. Kevin, we haven't seen a large difference in FLR or FCR for outsourcing versus insourcing. If you look at industry averages, and this is based on hundreds of support organizations, the average FCR and first-level resolution rates are about the same for an insourced and an outsourced environment. What I found is that the success of insourcing or outsourcing is largely dependent upon how well you manage the support organization. So we have seen outsourced organizations that are spectacularly successful, and we've seen some spectacular failures. Same is true for insourced support organizations. We've seen some spectacular successes, and we've seen just the opposite. There doesn't appear to be a direct correlation between outsourcing and first contact or first level resolution rate, or insourcing and first contact or first level resolution rate. So the notion that, gee, we're going to outsource this and automatically get better FCR and FLR, I think that's unrealistic. The flip side is also true. If we insource this, we're automatically going to get better FCR and FLR. That's not true either. We haven't found much difference in the metrics for insourcing versus outsourcing. Okay, this might be a question for you, Mike. It's coming from Doug. We use Bomgar for remote desktop support as well as click-to-chat support from customers. For a remote product, it really is the best. For chat, we'd like to know, I can't read the full question here. It's being obscured. I apologize for that. Did you want to comment, Mike, at all on the chat capabilities on the Bomgar tool?
Sure. The chat capabilities is very similar to what we described earlier in that it is agentless. We don't require an agent to be out there, so it does work on all the different platforms. It is a very common medium that our customers use to engage the support organization. So again, that can work on Wintel, Linux, et cetera, chatting on your iPad as well. So it's, again, it's just another medium for us to engage. And by the way, one of the earlier questions about surveys, well, just because of limits on time, we didn't get into that. But at the end of a remote support session, we do invoke a customer satisfaction survey, and we find that our customers fill that out because it's right at the time of the issue being resolved. So front end would be chat, and for us back end would be a customer satisfaction survey.
Here's another question for you, Mike, regarding Bomgar. This is from Robert. It says, I don't see Bomgar advertised as a maintenance tool, such as running hard drive, cleanup apps, OS utilities, etc. Is this a reasonable or possible use of Bomgar?
The primary use is break fix, either in a attended or unattended mode. So we do have very large support organizations, external-facing organizations like Novell, like Carbonite, where it's just a lot easier for them to go out when there's an issue and take over control of their customer's device. But again, that's the primary mode that we're in.
Okay. From R. Robinson, is there any examples of formulas for how to calculate the cost per contact metric for the service desk? And if so, are there materials out there like white papers that you could recommend? Yeah, there's a couple things you can do. And this is R. Robinson, don't know the first name. It's just an initial. You can go to MetricNet's website and download a whole series of white papers that show you how to calculate different key performance indicators. You can also go to a website that MetricNet runs called Zen of Support, Z-E-N-O-F, support.com, zenofsupport.com. We have a number of white papers on KPIs for the service desk, for the call center, and for desktop support that show you how to calculate those metrics. From Brian, is all the market data you provide based on retained IT shops or a mix of outsourced and retained peers? It's both, Brian. We have in our database both in-house and outsourced IT support. Again, from R. Robinson, all I've got is a first initial. Is there an industry methodology on when an incident should be handed off to desk-side support? For example, timelines on how long the service desk should spend? There really isn't. And we discourage support organizations from creating a cap on support time at level 1. For example, if you tell your support technicians that at 10 minutes you got to give it up, at 10 minutes you got to send it off to desktop support or some other level of support, we believe that you take some control out of the hands of level 1 support, and creating an artificial time restraint like that oftentimes forces agents or technicians to give up tickets when they're close to resolving them. At the same time, what you don't want is a technician spending hours and hours or even a half hour on a ticket. They need to recognize fairly quickly whether or not they might be able to resolve that ticket and get it off to the next level of support for their own benefit as well as for the benefit of the customer. So it's a two-edged sword. I don't believe in creating a time limit on how much time they should spend on a ticket, but at the same time, they've got to be held accountable to some productivity metric. What we recommend is holding level 1 technicians accountable to a first contact resolution rate goal, customer satisfaction goal, and then a ticket volume goal. Now, if they spend too much time on tickets, an hour per ticket, at the end of the month, they're only going to have solved, 100 tickets or something, and that's not good. So their score on that particular metric is going to decrease. They might get good customer satisfaction, they might get good FCR, but if they've only handled 100 tickets, their productivity is not good. So when you think about holding level 1 agents or even desktop support agents accountable, they need to be held accountable for quality as well as productivity. And at level 1, we suggest holding level 1 reps accountable for first contact resolution rate, number of tickets per month, and customer satisfaction. Those metrics pull in different directions, and it creates a healthy tension. And it forces the rep to say, wow, it's been 15 minutes. I either need to get this thing wrapped up or I need to send it off to desktop support or some other level of support. So in general, we don't think it's a good idea to create a time limit that says, hey, at 10 minutes you got to dump this thing, you got to send it someplace else. Let the reps, let the agents make that decision, but hold them accountable on productivity, on first contact resolution rate, and on customer satisfaction. From Jeff, what do you consider the best solution to enforce SPOC? Best solution is to have friends in high places. And by that I mean you need managers that believe in SPOC and are willing to say, look, this is the process. And there are going to be some defects. There are going to be situations where a person calls the desktop directly, and there are going to be slip-ups where desktop, in a moment of weakness, they do a drive-by or a fly-by or a snag. But in general, that should be the rare exception, not the rule. So what you need is support within the organization at a management level that says, we are a SPOC organization and we expect our end users to follow the SPOC process. Now, if you have not been following a single point of contact support process historically, the customers might not like it initially. There might be some pushback, and you might experience some temporary reduction in customer satisfaction, because if I'm used to having my own private desktop support technician that I can call every time I've got an issue, I'm not going to like it if suddenly that person says you got to call level 1 support and let them log the ticket. That's okay. You will experience some temporary reduction in customer satisfaction in most cases, but in the long run, you're far better off doing it this way. You will, in the long run, see higher levels of customer satisfaction and lower total cost of support. Mike, here's a question for you. It's from Vincent, and the question is, does Bomgar support screen sharing on Android? And if so, what versions?
It does. We do support screen sharing with Android. It does take coordination with the carrier. It does get a little bit more involved, so I would encourage you to reach out again. Just shoot me an email, msell@bomgar.com. I'll put you directly in touch with one of our SEs.
Okay. Let's see. Question here from Matthew, and this is another one for you, Mike. Does Bomgar require explicit user approval before a tech can remote to their device?
No, it does not.
Okay.
The user rights can be escalated as well, which is very, very key with respect to being able to provide support.
Mm-hmm. Okay. From Rhett, what's the best approach to drift away from the stop-and-grab desktop support interruptions without decreasing customer satisfaction? I sort of addressed that just a few minutes ago. You will experience some reduction in customer satisfaction temporarily if customers are used to the flyby or the stop-and-grab model. But in the long run, it's the best thing to do, even if you do experience a temporary decrease in customer satisfaction, because in the long run, you should see an improvement in customer satisfaction and a reduction in your total support costs. From Mark, the benchmark shows service desk average handle time at 12 minutes. Should service desk set a threshold on how long they're allowed to troubleshoot before being required to escalate to level 2? Let's see, I just answered that question, so let me move on. What is the range of technicians per customer? This is from Mark. It really depends upon whether you're talking about level 1 technicians or desktop support technicians, but the range is enormous. We've seen as few as 1 technician for every 20 end users for desktop support, and we've seen as few as 1 technician for every 2,500 users in desktop support. When it comes to level 1 support, we've seen as few as 1 service desk technician for every 50 users, and we've seen as few as 1 technician for every 5,000 users. So there's a huge range there. And it should be driven by the volume of tickets that come from your customers, not by some fixed ratio. There is no such thing as a fixed ratio that says we ought to have 1 desktop support tech for every 500 users, or we need 1 service desk tech for every 1,000 users. That's the wrong way to look at this. What you really need to look at is the demand for service from the end users. How many tickets do they produce? Because it varies by industry. For example, in a gas and electric utility, the average end user produces about 1/2 of 1 ticket at level 1 per month. In a financial services company, the number is about 3 tickets per end user per month. Same thing is true when it comes to desktop support, driven by a whole range of things, including the age of devices, whether or not you've got a mobile workforce, how often you refresh the devices that you have, how widespread your end users are. There's so many things that influence the ratio of technicians to end users, both at level 1 and at desktop support. That's why I gave you ranges and didn't steer you towards any particular number that says, hey, the right number of desktop techs for end users is 1 to 250 or 1 to 500. That's not the case. You've got to look at the workload generated by the user population, which will vary dramatically by industry and from company to company. Okay. From Rhett, let's see. No, sorry, wrong question. Okay. Let's see. Okay, from Gary. In my experience, asking clients to report flybys to the service desk has a negative impact on customer satisfaction. Have you witnessed this, and or do you have any metrics to support this? Well, you shouldn't ask your clients to report flybys. The flybys should be picked up through ticket audits and by desktop support, if they're reporting honestly, and to the extent that level 1 support identifies a flyby. Your end users, you put them in a conflict of interest situation if you ask them to report drive-bys or flybys or snags, because they want the support, and then you're asking them to report that as well. So in my experience, you shouldn't be asking the clients about the flyby or the drive-by. You should be looking at the tickets and auditing those every month, and also asking desktop support to check a box on the ticket if they believe the incident could and should have been resolved at level 1. Okay, from Kevin. We recently implemented a service desk, desktop support model. What should our initial focus be for the service desk? Training, knowledge base? Well, it really depends upon, when you say you just implemented it, it's kind of hard to say. It really depends upon how far up to speed you are. I mean, if you're a brand new service desk, clearly one of the first things you got to do is you got to train your agents so that they can provide a reasonable level of support. And you want to put some metrics in place so that you can track your performance. I would say, the technology, particularly the knowledge base, which you ask about here, that, at least for the time being, can wait while you bring your agents up to speed, you provide training for them, you start to improve your metrics, put a balanced scorecard in place, track your metrics, and when you have a reasonable level of performance and you've reached equilibrium, say 3 months, 6 months down the road, then you can start looking at a tool like a knowledge base. But I would say your most immediate need would be to train your agents and get them up to speed, start tracking metrics, put in place a balanced scorecard, because you've got to know how you're performing before you start spending money on a knowledge base, time and money on a knowledge base. Okay, from Daniel, this is probably for you, Mike. Let me read the question. What are the limitations for remotely controlling mobile devices? That's a pretty broad question. And I don't know if you can answer it, Mike, in those broad terms, but the question is, what are the limitations? I think you've partially answered the question by saying that you can provide remote support for Android. Did you want to add to that at all?
Sure. It's, again, full remote control for BlackBerry. We're able to control Android, again, with coordination through the carriers. Windows mobile devices, full remote control. And iOS, again, it's a co-browsing session with also the ability to push out configurations that commonly break, such as email or VPN clients, those types of things.
Okay. Thank you for that. From David, is there a statistically evidenced superior option between a help desk with a mix of level 1 and level 2 technicians and a help desk with all level 1 technicians? You know, you can, my belief is that if it's a level 2 technician, or if they're working in the service desk providing remote support, they are by definition not level 2. They might be tier 2 within level 1, but they are not level 2. We define level 2 as being support outside level 1, for example, desktop support. So we use a different terminology. It is sometimes appropriate to have tier 1 and tier 2 technicians working in a level 1 service desk, but it generally doesn't make sense until you've got a pretty good sized service desk. And by that I mean, you know, the break point that we look at is around 20 technicians in the level 1 service desk. When you've got that many technicians, it may make sense to start creating a tier 1 and tier 2. Now in general, you should have at least 5 tier 1 level 1 technicians for every tier 2 level 1 technician. You don't want an even mix of those two things. Your tier 2 technicians at level 1 should be the most experienced support techs that you have, and tickets should be hot transferred to them or warm transferred, depending upon how you use that terminology, from the tier 1 technicians when the tier 1 technician feels like, well, it can be resolved, but I don't quite have the experience, so you hot transfer it or warm transfer it to a tier 2 technician. So there's a scale effect which says that it doesn't make sense until you have at least 20 techs or 20 representatives working at level 1 support. And again, for the clarity of terminology, we prefer the tier 1, tier 2 at level 1. The idea of a level 2 tech working in level 1 makes no sense to us. So we use a different terminology. Those are some rough guidelines. If you're going to have tier 2 techs working in your level 1 service desk, make sure that you don't have an even mix or anywhere close to an even mix of tier 1, tier 2. In general, the ratio should be about 5 tier 1 for every tier 2 techs working in your level 1 service desk. Okay. All right. Okay. From Gerardo, sorry, don't want to be rude, but it is extending the presentation. You can jump off. You can jump off at any time if you'd like to. From Rhett, I heard the friends in high places statement before you got to my question. Thanks. Okay. From Ron, need to exit for another meeting. Okay. Thanks for coming, Ron. From Derek, what's a good tool to produce metrics? Well, any good tool that you've got is going to produce metrics for you, whether it's your automatic call distributor, your ACD, your trouble ticket system, your IVR, your remote diagnostic tool like Bomgar. Any good tool is going to produce metrics for you. The thing you want to watch out for, Derek, is tracking too many metrics because that's a common problem in the industry. And more importantly, not spending enough time on the metrics to analyze and diagnose and develop action plans based on those metrics, because the real value of metrics is not in your ability to track and trend performance, but rather in your ability to use those metrics to diagnose issues, act on those issues, that is, take intelligent management actions based on those metrics, and then move forward with that in an effort to improve the quality of the customer experience and or reduce your support costs over time. So in terms of what's a good tool to produce metrics, all of the good support tools are going to produce metrics for you. So that's not the issue. The issue is, which metrics are important, and I would encourage you to look at MetricNet's KPI presentations. We do webcasts on KPIs for the service desk and desktop support, and we talk about which metrics are the most important. Okay. From Jeff, in a global organization with 30,000 plus end users, do you see the metrics change in regards to FCR when desktop offices are around the world and service desk is in one location, or should the goals be the same? Scale should work to your benefit, Jeff, meaning that as the number of end users increases, you're going to see an increase in the number of technicians supporting those end users, and that means the critical mass of knowledge that you have grows over time. Now, if you've got 30,000 end users, 30,000 or more end users, you're probably going to have, at least 100 level 1 technicians. Maybe it's less than that, but you're going to have a pretty good number of level 1 technicians if you are consolidated in one location. That represents a huge critical mass of knowledge and expertise. When you get that critical mass of knowledge and expertise, training is more effective, level 1 resolution rates are better, and it does make sense to have a tier 1, tier 2 structure, as a previous listener asked about. And you can increase your first contact, and your first level resolution rates. So in general, scale works in your favor, not just in terms of reducing your cost, but also in terms of improving customer satisfaction by increasing the first contact resolution rate, because you can amass that critical mass of expertise and knowledge in a single location. Okay, a couple more questions here. Oh, they're all just thank you. So Robert, thank you for your comment. Gus, thank you for your comment. And also from Jasbir saying, thank you for your comment. If anybody else has any questions, I'm at the end of the questions. Please type them in right now. I'll do my best to answer your questions. Otherwise, we'll end the webinar momentarily. Once again, I want to thank you for joining us today. I do hope you found it to be insightful and informative. Please remember to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast, because this is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. We will also send you a link to the webcast recording so that if you'd like to watch it again, you can, or if you'd like to forward that link to your colleagues or peers, you can do that as well. Okay, that's it for today's webcast. I'd like to thank our sponsor today, Bomgar. Mike, thank you very much. Mike Sell, thank you for your insight on the Bomgar tool. Thanks to all of you who dialed in and spent a good portion of your afternoon with us. I look forward to seeing you on future webcasts. Many of you are already clients of ours and Bomgar's. For those of you who are not, I would encourage you to reach out to MetricNet and Bomgar respectively if you have any questions about MetricNet products and services, and if you have any questions about Bomgar products and services. You can also reach them through the numbers that are shown here on the second page. Mike Sell is at msell@bomgar.com. Phone number in the United States, 770-407-1820. And then for MetricNet, our contact information is here on page 56. You can reach us by emailing us at info@metricnet.com or calling us in the United States at 703-992-7559. Thank you again, everybody. Goodbye now.